like to make some clarifications about the content of this video. I understand there's a lot of fake stories and false information out there on the UFO topic, and while I understand how that can muddy the waters and confuse things and distract people from real evidence and more substantial information, I also believe that on a topic like this, where nobody knows the full, true nature or history of it, that all things should be put on the table and that we can individually for ourselves sort through and evaluate and assess the information to come to our own conclusions, and we don't need to rely on other people and experts to tell us what is worth evaluating and assessing and what is not. So please keep that in mind as you watch this video. Thank you. Is it possible President Franklin D. Roosevelt met an alien in 1936? Is it possible the United States military had top secret flying saucer technology it was producing during the 1930s and during the 1940s and throughout World War II? These are some of the claims made by John B. Leith, who claims to be a former OSS CIA operative from the World War II era. This presentation is part one of If It Were True, the UFO manuscript of John B. Leith. So before we even look at these claims, of course, with any source, we need to ask, who is the author? Who is John B. Leith? Well, based on the information in his book, he lived from 1920 to 1998. He was an OSS, Office of Strategic Services, which was the precursor to the CIA. So the OSS was the CIA during World War II times and prior. He wrote another book called The Man with the Golden Sword, where he described his operations during the war of going into Europe to retrieve certain precious Christian relics and recover them from possible Nazi confiscation. And basically, Leith finished this research book on UFOs in 1980. He was a journalist for 25 years. States that he has a photographic memory, which, if that were true, could explain how you could go to, say, the National Archives or go and see top secret documents that you only have 15 minutes to look at, and he could remember it all and convey it to us in this book, potentially. And according to the book, he became interested in UFOs after a 1965 Brooksville, Florida incident, which I don't know about that case. Maybe you do. But that is what apparently got him into the topic after his career in the OSS and World War II and all of that. Now, on the third bullet down here, his best friend and research partner was a general of the military who was attached to the CIA, is how he describes it. And going up top here on how this book came to be, he gave a manuscript of this book he'd been working on for decades to someone named Robin Andrews in 1990 at a conference in Florida. And he allowed Robin Andrews to read it, and then she was permitted to publish it after his death. So that's the story of where this book comes from. I want to do a deeper dive on John B. Leith and see if he really did work for the OSS, if he really did contact the CIA, because we're going to see now what he says the sources of all of this information is. And this is somewhat unique, I find, in that he says all the places where he got his information, and that's not always the case with some of these really bold, out there claims about the UFO phenomena. There you can see a title. That's the title of the book, Genesis for the Space Race, the Inner Earth and the Extraterrestrials. So here's where John B. Leith says he got this information from primary sources, which must remain anonymous, 100 interviews, 3 years, including senators, congressmen, top military men, high-ranking civil servants, retired CIA and FBI agents. he went and retrieved documents and interviews from the U.S. State Department, the National Archives, Library of Congress, the Smithsonian, NSA files, and OSS records. And through all of this came this book, Genesis for the Space Race, which was published only 10 years ago, in 2014. And his research partner for this book is someone named Leland Frank Hudson. You can do some research on him. I also have not done a deep dive on him, but apparently he was into a lot of topics and was sort of a treasure hunter and researcher of the more obscure topics back in the day. And according to the book, the CIA allegedly approved Leith's disclosures in this book in 1975. Would be nice to get some kind of corroboration on that, but that's what he says. And as we mentioned, he gave this manuscript to Robin Andrews, and it was published 10, 24 years later. So this is going to be part 1 today. All right, this book is fairly lengthy, and he's saying a lot in the book. So part 1 here is going to be focusing on the early section of the book, the first few chapters, classic UFO case twists, and aliens walking into the White House. Yes. Now, before we get into this is very important. I want to share with you a preface and my rationale for A, studying this material myself, and B, presenting it here for others to take in and investigate on their own. 9 out of 10 people or more would look at some of this information and dismiss it immediately and believe that it's way too far out there, it's bizarre, it's irrational. But that is a mistake. As much as believing something that's unfounded or a hoax, disbelieving it without properly investigating it is also as much of a fallacy. And let's take a look really quickly here at some of these bullet points. Number 1, not claiming that these events are true. Get that straight. I am not here making to tell you, hey, this is what happened. I'm here to tell you this is the information somebody who claims that this is where they got this information from is sharing with the world through this book being published. And in my approach to this topic, and anything, really, any topic, and the overall inquiry into what is our reality, what's our history, etc., is casting a wide net, right? If we really want to get to the bottom of this all, let's put a big net out there. Let's take in as much as we can. Number 3, this is a jigsaw puzzle, right? This book may be 90% nonsense, but there may be a couple pieces in there that are fitting into this jigsaw puzzle. That's how we have to approach all these sources. Number 4, exploring the edges, same idea, similar idea. I believe that in this field, in any field, it is our duty to push beyond the boundaries of what we know, what's accepted, and venture further out there, especially with the UFO topic, because obviously big secrets have been being kept, and we're going to start seeing some things be disclosed. But if they could keep this general secret, just that these things, UFOs are real, etc., long for 80 years, with 95% of the public being duped into believing that it's nonsense, then it stands to reason that there are probably much more, like a labyrinth of deeper secrets that are still guarded. So some of these things that seem wilder may actually turn out to be true. And that goes to my next point. Nobody knows anything. This is part of humility in critical inquiry, any kind of critical thinking and studying any kind of subject is really nobody knows anything. Okay, specifically with the UFO case. Yeah, we know a couple things. We have some pretty strong evidence for certain facts that we can agree on, but really anything's on the table with this for the most part. And as I mentioned, there's layers of secrecy. Most likely we can safely assume that. And maybe off the beaten path books like this may offer us an entryway into prying in to avenues for further investigation. And to finish it off here, the quote on the very bottom, "Truth is stranger than fiction." And there's something to this. Is an old saying, but it has always resonated with me because that may in fact be the case. And even some of the whistleblowers who have come out and testified to the Senate Intelligence Committee have told them things that are stranger than fiction about this whole issue. So with all of that in mind, I want to take the time to preface that before we get into this information here. So you don't just dismiss it, that you take it for what it is, what this guy published saying he found out from sources and documents, and do your own investigation here. Okay? So first what we're going to look at is alien contact during the Roosevelt era. We're talking 1936 to 1942. Fascinating if some of this stuff is true. So back in 36, according to Leith, there were some extraterrestrial encounters. Roosevelt was visited by a human-looking ET that was from our solar system. And in addition to that meeting, there were landings of strange creatures at 3 airports in the northern part of the country. In these visits at these airports, there was octopus-like aliens and yetis with them. Now, don't click away just yet. Let's keep an open mind here. That's enough to get anyone to dismiss this whole subject here, but let's take it for what it is, okay? According to Leith, these beings were described by intelligence sources as octopus-like. They had tentacles and no arms and legs, and they apparently came from outside the solar system, and they were peaceful and in one way or another communicated their peaceful intentions. Now, they were accompanied by, yes, these yetis were acting as their guards, is what Leith says. And here's my crude animation here of what this might have looked like. And I do this just to bring a little bit of visual and see how I'm picturing it as I read the book, to offer a little bit of a visualization. This would have been at an unknown airport in the northern United States in 1936. Imagine these guys out there dealing with this issue if this really happened. Pretty cool, pretty fascinating if it were true. Now, after this happens, Roosevelt's meeting allegedly with an alien and these alleged stoppings at the airports, Roosevelt apparently wants to inform the public. And it becomes a convoluted strategy where he meets with some of the top media personnel in the country at the time, and they decide, all right, step one is let's test the public and see how they react, and then we'll move forward with our disclosure plan. And this brilliant idea was to put a narration that was done by Orson Welles of the War of the Worlds novel, which was an H.G. Wells book. And in 1938, they broadcast this live. You can look this up. This is a known event. And people panicked. Apparently, 8 people committed suicide, jumping out of tall buildings in New York. There were state troopers that were deployed to go after these things from a fake radio broadcast that, according to Leith, and this has also been claimed in many other sources, as that this was an intentional test on the public to see if they could handle it. So basically, this fails after that, and they say, all right, we're going to have to keep this a secret for now, at least. And so, allegedly, according to Leith, the policy of secrecy is established, and it involved initially a group of 100 financial elites in the country that included Henry Ford. So take that for what it is. Another thing that was occurring during this time period was there were UFOs being spotted over electric streetcars. Now, I personally have not heard this before. Some maybe with more years in the field of ufology have heard these, and I'm curious to investigate these further. but apparently they were seen, cigar-shaped UFOs were seen hovering over streetcar systems and sucking the electric energy out of them. And in 1944, there was an incident in Washington which apparently the media reported on to some degree, and they became known as juice hogs, mysterious juice hogs. Don't know. Do some research into that. That'd be interesting. And again, Leith claims that these UFOs caused the New York blackout of 1977 and the blackout of the Eastern Seaboard in 1975. Now, after all this activity, the OSS, remember they're the CIA in 1942 to 1945, the leader of that was General Bill Donovan. And apparently in 1942, he concludes that real aliens were visiting Earth from other planets in the solar system. And also it appeared that they could appear and disappear at will, and that they were in fact monitoring Earth's skies. So that's up to about 1942, and allegedly that is what the intelligence community at the time, which was underdeveloped, remember everything doesn't really start till 1947 with the National Security Act, with the CIA and the Air Force splitting up and all that, but now starting between 1948 and 1958, we see some of these classic UFO cases with a twist. And I'm familiar with these cases. You may be very familiar, especially with the Mantell case, which we're going to get into here in a second. And Leith's report on what the truth is about this is fascinating, and it's a real twist to what the accepted storyline is in ufology for these. So a couple of these classic cases, let's take a look at them. The Mantell incident, 1948. If you're not familiar, basically this gentleman, Thomas Mantell, I believe his name is Thomas Mantell, anyway, he was spotted a UFO. He was out with a couple other flyers near an Air Force base and near Kentucky, and spotted a UFO, chased the UFO, and crashed and died. And the UFO was also called in by numerous military tower posts in the region. So it was corroborated, and this was investigated by Project Sign. It was determined to be either unknown in Project Sign. When Project Blue Book took it over, the case, at one point or another, it was determined that it was the planet Venus, right? So one of the top young pilots at the time crashed chasing the planet Venus. That's the official determination. And on a side note, the first head of Project Blue Book, Edward Ruppelt, investigated this case thinking that it didn't add up. He went to J. Allen Hynek, who became the lead astronomer for Project Blue Book, and said, hey, is there any way this could have been Venus? And Hynek basically said, you wouldn't have even been able to see Venus on that day. At that time, it would have been like barely visible. So to think that Mantell chased this and crashed is pretty far out there. And his flying buddy, who was interviewed by Ruppelt in the investigation, also said, look, I knew this guy. He would have never went and risked his life up there because he went up to like an altitude where you could die from the breathing complications. And he had a family, had kids and whatnot. So his partner was like, I just don't think he would have ever chased anything unless it was real. So there's some background for you for the Mantell case. That's where the line has basically been drawn. Officially, it was Venus. But then the next layer in ufology seems to be, it was probably a Navy skyhook balloon. And a lot of ufologists draw the line there. Or just draw it at the line of, do we believe that, But Leith takes it somewhere totally different. So let's get into it. The deeper secrets of the Mantell case. So Mantell apparently saw three figures observing him when he approached this UFO. And I've seen that reported in other places, but this was the first time that I've read someone saying they actually read it in an intelligence report. And this is the interesting part. Not only did Mantell crash, according to Leith, But the UFO crashed because what happened was Mantell fired at the UFO and actually managed to hit a kind of critical part of it. And the UFO had a automatic response system that shot back with a sort of energy beam that downed Mantell or damaged his craft. So in other words, the beings didn't necessarily fire back at Mantell. It was an automatic built-in system into the craft, which we could extrapolate that in the future that would be a pretty cool feature to have on a craft. It saves the pilot having to look and respond. It just automatically would fire back if you're being attacked upon. Now, the photographers and the investigators went to the Mantell crash site, and then they also apparently went to the UFO crash site. And lo and behold, they get there, and 3 human-looking aliens emerge from the crashed UFO, and they were apparently from Venus. Now, they escort these Venetians back to the Air Force Base, and they interrogate them. Basically find out that they came from Venus, and they tell them that they were on a peaceful mission, and they mean no harm. And basically they explain that they didn't mean to kill Mantell. They didn't mean to down his craft, but it was built in. So they advise the Air Force, look, please tell your pilots don't to shoot at our craft anymore. Otherwise that's just going to happen. That's how our craft are built. That's according to Leith what happened. And then the Air Force apparently are not letting them go. And they're detaining them for a few days. And then the Venetian mothership comes and beams up these 3 aliens to the ship. And here's another one of my crude animations here of what we might imagine this being like. This was apparently on January 10th, 1948, and this would have been at a U.S. Air Force base somewhere near Franklin, Kentucky. The mothership coming over and beaming up their brethren that had been caught up in this crash incident. Now, here's an interesting side note before we move on from the Mantell case. This is a quote from Leith. Air Force intelligence privately wondered why, if the aliens were able to retrieve their people, why hadn't they retrieved their ship? So this is part of the backstory that people speculate about. Have ET groups purposely left us with things to A, help us, or B, to just experiment and to observe and see, hey, can they figure this out, Who knows? But interesting to think about. Now, we move on from the Mantell case and we look at the 1955 Farmington UFO crash retrieval. Now, this was a case where there were hundreds of UFOs spotted by many witnesses. There's a real newspaper headline, and that's an animation there of what some of the witness testimony claimed to see. And here's what John B. Leith says happened based on the alleged documents he read. There were, in fact, crashed craft and beings recovered in the Farmington UFO incident of 1955. 3 saucer-shaped UFOs that had 28 dead alien bodies inside of them. Now, these aliens were golden tan-skinned, not grays, and they had 5 fingers and 4 lungs, apparently. Also found in the craft were maps and special food wafers, which Leith claimed they had determined that if you ate them, you could be alert and not need sleep for 3 days. That's something I've never heard of before. It sounds bizarre. Many people will probably be very skeptical because a lot of the alien reports and alleged autopsies show that they don't have a digestive tract, all this and that. But, who knows here? Who knows? We don't know, that's for sure. We are not privy to this information. And lastly, the bodies were placed in glass cylinders and sent to Wright-Patterson. Now, we've heard this before. For example, Leonard Stringfield had witnesses come to him saying that they saw 30 alien bodies in glass cylinders at Wright-Patterson. So we see a bit of a correlation here. We do. some of this stuff may really be true. And some of the UFO characteristics are described. What was found was a small force field power system, about a 3-foot diameter cylindrical object that they had determined was the power source, anti-gravitic. Apparently, they had determined that the navigation system was tuned to mind patterns, something we've heard again and again, that the UFO craft operate based on an interface with the brain so that it can be driven by thought. And this was something I personally haven't heard before. Apparently, when they were investigating the site, they inserted a magnetic ring into some kind of placeholder, and the craft would sort of peel apart into 9 petal-like sections. So wild stuff. But Leith in this book is claiming that that's what he read in these reports that he got his hands on. And after this, apparently this Farmington incident, everything was sent over to Wright-Patterson. They had a team of 150 working on this, the materials and the bodies. And a year later, 1956, they gave a report, which was allegedly at Offutt Air Force Base, where they showed films, samples, and bodies to certain congressmen and military personnel. And according to Leith, Edward Ruppelt was there, Captain Ruppelt from Project Blue Book, and he was apparently really taken aback by what he witnessed in this report. And certainly that makes us think. Ruppelt wrote his book in 56. He died in 1960. Was he going to talk about something? Who knows? And the last UFO case twist here, another thing that I've personally never heard of before, was a UFO crash retrieval in 1958 in which the pilots they found were robots. And apparently this crashed UFO in the town of Oregon in Oregon near the Columbia River was found, and there were 4 robots inside. And apparently these files exist at the CIA vault in Arlington, Virginia. So fascinating stuff here. Now it gets wilder. We move forward here a bit, and now we're talking 1975. And according to John B. Leith, an alien walked into the White House and had a meeting with President Gerald Ford. So it's February 18th, about 10 p.m. A craft lands in a park near Georgetown, and a 6-foot human-looking ET heads over to the White House and asks to meet with the president. The guard at the White House refuses him entrance. So the alien proceeds to enter anyway and starts to walk down the hallway. The Secret Service agent shoots at the alien, but the bullet passes through him. And then the alien from Venus goes up to the Oval Room, and the door's locked, and he passes through the wall into the room and has a chat with President Ford, in which he is advising him about Earth's nuclear developments and warns him of things of that nature. And upon his departure, leaves him with a metallic spherical Venetian book, which Ford apparently gives off to intelligence program of some sort to try to decode and figure it out. So fascinating again. Sounds wild, sounds bizarre, sounds crazy, but again, and I say that I'm saying this more often now, if we find out in the next couple years, the White House comes out and says, hey, yes, aliens are real, they exist, and they have a presence on Earth, it becomes less far-fetched to believe that something like this might have happened. And even at the very least, it's just healthy to let our imaginations expand and consider that these things could be true. Nonetheless, John B. Leith is the one who put this in a book saying he got it from certain sources, so who knows. And here's my last crude animation here of what this was going on here. There's a Venetian in the hallway. The officer is shooting at him, and what's pretty wild additional detail is in the book, Leith claims that American presidents have had over 60 visits from aliens. Imagine if that were true. So after these cases and events, according to Leith's research, by 1978, the U.S. intelligence evaluates the situation and categorizes the aliens into three categories: friendly, hostile, and unknown. And for these hostile group, they are described as being humanoid, diminutive size to over 6 feet tall, and that they had uncovered that they had attempted to establish some bases on Earth. So this is probably mostly the grays, the small grays and tall grays that we hear about for many decades now. And now the unknown category are the stranger-looking ones, and perhaps the extra-dimensional intelligent phenomena that people have reported. And apparently there were incidents of telepathic communication with Air Force personnel. And these unknown, stranger-looking ones, non-humanoid, apparently was determined that they appeared to have a more advanced technology. So this was the assessment, according to Leith, in 1978. So, in reflecting here, some fascinating information, some wild claims here, some things for us to think about. Number one, how might the possibility of earlier ET contact impact our understanding of post-1947 ufology? I mean, most of ufology as we know it really gets going after 47 and Roswell and this and that. But if things started happening as early as 1936 with Roosevelt, and Roosevelt knew about it, and the OSS started to work on it, I mean, it does change how we understand it, because if that were true, there would have been already a core of secrecy before 1947 and all of that even happened. Number two, can any of these alleged events be corroborated? For me, because I'm so interested to try to get to the bottom of this as much as I possibly can as a civilian with no connections really at all, I want to look at these events that Leith writes about and see, is there any other data and information that could corroborate the likelihood of any of it being true. So there's a lot of points there, and I would encourage you to do that as well. If any of this struck a chord with you as interesting, intriguing, do some research. We need us all to do research to add to the field and to keep expanding it and evolving it. Number three, is it conceivable that stories like this could someday come out after public disclosure is normalized? This kind of goes back to what I was saying about once it's official that aliens are real, these kind of stories are less far-fetched. So are these the kind of things that might come out in 10 years, in 50 years? Oh, no way. Roosevelt met an ET in 36, and there was some octopus alien at an airport in 1936. Like, it's wild. But maybe these are the kind of things that eventually come out. And lastly here, if it is officially confirmed that there's an alien presence on Earth, do claims like this become more plausible? Yes, that's what we just spoke about. So things to think about. Let me know if you have any questions or anything to add or corroborate with any of this. Again, I am not saying any of this is true. I'm simply presenting the information. I find it interesting for the reasons that I've articulated, and I hope that you got some value from this. So thank you for watching, and I will be doing some other follow-ups with this book, as the information is quite unique in my assessment. So please stay tuned, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.